Dr. Rima on the phone line. I have our guest on Skype. I'm trying to make both sets of people on at the same time. So if you'll bear with me a moment, I'm going to try to do just that. Dr. Rima, I'm afraid that the people will not be able to hear you on the phone, but let me see if I can get you through Skype. Hold on, folks. What I'm doing is I'm trying to get Skype to add in. What we're going to do, Dr. Rima, is I'm going to hang up on everyone. And Dr. Rima, if you will call me on Skype, that will be very helpful. All right, the wonders of modern communications. All right, now Dr. Rima should call me momentarily. We'll get her talking, and then I'll try to get in the guest. Well, now this is interesting. Blank screen. Our guest is a lawyer. We have some very interesting things to talk about, and I surely want to get her on the line. So let's try this way. Ah, why? I want to see what Skype is doing. There we go. All right, Dr. Rima. Here is our guest. Here is Dr. Rima and the guest. Oh, let's see what's going on here. No, it's not letting me call them. That's so strange. Well, let's try getting the guest first. All right, add to group call. Now that's interesting. I didn't know there was a group call. All right, you should be hearing that, folks.
Hello.
Hello, Catherine. Ralph Fusatola here. I am trying to get Dr. Rima
It's
to join us,
Mr. Fusatola.
and let us see what's going on here. Um,
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, and from the information I see on my screen, the good folks can hear you fine too. But I am right now trying to make sure that I can uh, properties, and that's the window I want. Wow, we're getting some interesting and strange things going on. I believe that Dr. Rima is trying to call us right now. So that's part of what's going on. All right. I believe, there we are. I've got you on the live stream right now, and Dr. Rima is trying to call me, but it's coming through on my cell
Hello.
phone. We have all these different devices. Yeah, that's what's going on. She's trying to reach me, and it's coming through on the cell phone. Why don't you introduce yourself? I'm going to actually let go of my talk button, and you will be the sole party on the live stream. Tell us who you are and why Dr. Rima wants to talk to you today.
Can you hear me? Okay.
All right. Well, I understand that you're a practicing attorney. How you doing? Can you hear me okay? Hello? Can you hear me, Catherine? Uh,
Yes, I can hear you fine.
This
okay,
is
folks, let's see
Dr.
what's happening.
Rima.
Dr. Rima, are you with
Dr.
us?
Rima, can you hear
Hi,
me?
Catherine. Yes, nice
And
to meet
Catherine,
you.
you're both with us.
Nice to meet you.
Are we on the
Wonderful.
air, Ralph?
I don't know.
Yes, Ralph is here.
Ralph,
Catherine, are you
are you
here?
there?
Can,
We are having some some serious difficulties with that. Yeah, I can. Are we on
Yes,
the air?
I can hear you both.
Okay.
I cannot be heard.
Okay.
Dr. Rima, you are
Well,
live streaming.
welcome to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. I'm Rima Elabo, MD. I am the medical director of the Natural Solutions Foundation. Our principal website is www.drrima, R-I-M-A, truthreports.com. And we have a number of other websites that are of quite a lot of importance to you and to your freedom. One of them, of course, is our marketplace, www.nsf marketplace. That stands for Natural Solutions Foundation, nsfmarketplace.com, where you will find things that, frankly speaking, the FDA and the CDC and the other globalist powers they think they should be do not want you to have, because they work, they're inexpensive, they're safe, and they put your health where it belongs, in your hands, not in the hands of a corporation, a state, or a white coat. And that's very important. I urge you to visit there. Now, if you are listening to this show, either live or in the archives, and you are not on our mailing list, so you are not receiving our uh, complimentary email newsletter, please go to that website, drrimatruthreports.com, and enter your first name and your email. The information that we send out is literally life saving, and it's certainly liberty saving. We'll be talking in a little while with about what the CDC is doing, which is to give itself broad medical tyranny powers that violate every right of informed consent that you might ever have thought you had. And we have to stop them. There are many things that we have to do. Now, our guest today is a crusading and very brave attorney named Katherine Hines, who will be talking with us about a variety of things which also impact your freedom and indeed your ability to stay alive once the state gets its hooks into your, or it sets its sights on getting its hooks into your money or your property or your whatever, or your mother's or your father's money or property. And the issue of guardianship and elder abuse is a very, very important one. And that's one of the things that we'll be talking about with Katherine Hines. But before we do any of that, and by the way, Ralph is with us, but because of electronic peculiarities, um, he cannot be heard if Katherine and I can be heard, or you can
Or
hear him.
maybe, I'm not sure about that, Dr.
Oh,
Rima.
are you now
It's
audible?
bizarre, but if I hold down a specific button, you can hear me, and the good folks out in the world can hear me. So I'm
In the
gonna,
world of streaming.
yep.
Well, wonderful.
So I
So
can,
keep that button held. It's
yes,
it's kind of an opposite dead man switch. It's a live man switch.
yep.
Keep that button held down. Before we go any further, I would like to give people who are interested in the condition of the president of the foundation, my husband, and Ralph's very good friend, Major General Albert N. Stubblebine. As you know, or as you may know, he is in the critical care unit of a medical center in the middle of New Jersey, and he got there because he collapsed in the middle of the night 2 weeks ago today. He was very, very weak and very diminished, but I brought him to the United States for advanced natural health care. And ironically enough, we wind up getting advanced allopathic health care, because once he collapsed, I called 911. He was brought to the emergency room, and then he was sent to the critical care unit where he's been for 2 weeks. Now, virtually everyone involved in his care at the beginning of that 2 week episode, and it's going to go on longer than 2 weeks, uh, told me that he was going to die. I should prepare myself because he was not going to live through the night. He was not going to live through the procedure that would be done to try to give him some breathing room in his collapsed lungs. He was going to die. And I said, thank you. And I ignored them because my entire medical career has been spent fixing people whom these kinds of guys and gals give up on, and they turn out to be wrong most of the time. Of course, I'm in allopathic land, and so I don't have as much control as I do when I'm in my office. But still, I thought, well, we can do things our way, not necessarily identifying them to you, doctor, while you do things your way. And so um, he is, Ralph saw him today. He is still a very, very, very sick puppy, and he has a long way to go. But he wasn't supposed to be alive for these last 2 weeks, according to the allopathic gentlemen and ladies. And the reason that he is because of the things that are happening around and outside of the allopathic activities, which they firmly expected to not save him. For example, Ralph came today and fought his way through vile traffic to get home to start the program with a device that he acquired in Alaska some years ago. There are only about 12 in the world. And this device puts through a small wand that's attached to the wiring of the box, it puts static charge or vital force into the body. Now, if you're very, very sick, obviously your vital force, your life energy is much lower than it needs to be. So this device introduces vital force. That's pretty important. It is not a part of allopathic medicine. Should it be? Of course it should be. Is it? No, of course it's not. Now, we've been doing other things which I do not feel at liberty to speak about until General Stubblebine leaves the hospital, and then I will shout it from the rooftops. Um, it involves a rather phenomenal substance, which it may get kind of noisy because I'm in a waiting room, but it involves a rather phenomenal substance that I'm spraying into General Bert's mouth um, 5 times a day. Very interesting. That's another story. So I'm going to see if I can go around the corner to have a little bit less interference, sonic interference, because it's noisy. Suddenly it's noisy here. So wait, let me go around the corner, see what I got. Okay. Um, and then there are other things happening for him, but meanwhile, he's trying to learn how to breathe without the ventilator. And if he can do that, he won't need a tracheotomy. And if he doesn't have a tracheotomy, then he'll be able to speak. Um, I'm trying to avoid it. Every one of the medical people is pressuring me to allow the tracheotomy, and I think that he can learn to breathe on his own. I, as usual, have a minority opinion. Ralph and the people who care about Bert and I are holding the space of Bert manifesting the wellness that he is capable of. The medical establishment is looking at me with sad puppy eyes and saying he's going to die. And I believe that they're wrong, as I said. Now, one of the things that I want to say before we go to our guest, Katherine Hines, is that when someone is in a hospital or a care situation, the most important thing that they have that can keep them alive, literally alive, is an advocate. Someone must be there with them, and someone must face up to the doctors and nurses and physical therapists and whatever and say why. And until something is clear to you and it makes sense, don't say yes. And by the way, every time I sign a consent form for anything, I write the following words: all vaccines refused. And when they were getting ready to insert the feeding tube, the GI surgeon a nice man, said to me, "Oh, for God's sakes, don't mess this up. Don't write anything on this consent form that isn't already written there, because then it won't be a legal document." And I looked at him
Bullshit.
and I said to him, "Of course, it's a legal document. I'm going to initial it and I'm going to sign the document after I write all vaccines refused." He said, "I'm not giving him vaccines." I said, "No, that's not the plan, but who knows what could happen." And I wrote on there, "all vaccines refused," and I signed my initials, REL. And then I turned it over and I signed my full name. And he said, "Oh, for God's sakes, why'd you go and mess that up?" And I said to him, "Because I know my legal rights, doctor." Now, you have to do that all the time. You have to be like a dragon guarding your most precious treasure. That's the person that you care about. Otherwise, God knows what can happen. So that's my message to you today. General Burt is very ill, but he is inching his way forward into the land of health. Okay,
Dr.
anything?
Rima, one
Yes,
last thought on that. Watching Bert, having seen him at several
today.
points and today, at several points during this crisis and today, he is coming back. He's
He
coming
most
back.
certainly is. He most certainly is. Now, if you are of a mind to donate to help defray the absolutely unexpected costs that we are incurring by having to come to the United States and stay here for a potentially extended period of time, we would be very happy. Any donation will receive our thank you of General Burt's quite extraordinary book, ebook on intentionality and remote viewing, a book well worth having. And a donation of $100 or more will receive that, and also a bottle of the Dr. Rima recommends nano silver 10 parts per million, which in ways currently unspecified, I do not wish to specify how, are helping to save his life. He has had a massive septic infection, which is why his kidneys shut down. And suffice it to say that nanosilver 10 parts per million is not part of the hospital protocol, but there are amazing ways that things can work their way into a person if you are determined. So, having said that, my Nano Silver 10 parts per million will be a thank you for donations of $100 or more. And Ralph, would you please give the link for people who wish to help us get through this financially, as well as by sending their intention and their love and wishes and prayers for this wonderful, wonderful human being?
Absolutely, Dr. Rima. It is on the screen, folks. When you're looking at this live stream or the archive, you'll see a photo of General Burt, Dr. Rima, and myself. And below it, it has a couple of links. And the one you want is the donate link. It's right there. Just type it into your browser and do it.
Thank you, and please do it. This is a very serious financial crisis for us, as well as a very serious health crisis for General Burt. We had no plans to come for an extended stay in the United States until he became so ill that that was the only option for us for natural medicine in the United States. So, now, having said that, welcome, Katherine Hine, and thank you for your patience in allowing us to give our listeners an update on this precious human being who is so ill.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rima, for having me on as a guest at this very difficult time. I wanted to add a few words of encouragement too. In our little community, our discussion group in guardianship reform, there's an individual who's been an activist by the name of Tim Larman, who recently had a massive heart attack and was on
Mm.
a ventilator. And we all thought that he was actually about to die, and they removed the ventilator. Basically, everyone had said their goodbyes, and it was assumed he would die. Well, he's breathing on his own,
All
and
right, all right.
yes,
Thank you,
so
Katherine. That's a
yeah.
that's a most heartening and welcome gift. Thank you.
yeah, it does happen, and
It does actually. Um, and he's been a very central figure in guardianship matters, and perhaps we'll touch on his contribution as well. Would you please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them why guardianship is an issue?
yes, my name is Katherine Hines, and I am actually an inactive attorney at this point. I went inactive in 2011. I practiced for over 30 years, though, in the courts of Oklahoma and Ohio. I'm now a broadcaster with WLJA Radio. It's an internet radio show, and I do a once a week broadcast against psychiatry.
All
Um,
right, I'm with you as a psychiatrist.
right, right. On Tuesdays, 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And then I do a Thursday broadcast called Who Judges the Judges about our current status of judicial non accountability, which is kind of intertwined with the psychiatry issue, because of course one depends on the other. Um, yeah,
And then we have rolling into the mix. And Catherine, as another retired lawyer, I understand where you're coming from. But then we add into the mix that our friends at the CDC are now trying to abrogate to themselves life and death authority over us all in violation of the Nuremberg Code.
I would not say life and death authority. I would say life and death tyrannical authority. And I want to point out to people that no tyrannical state, no dictatorship, no uh, tyranny in modern times has been able to accomplish its tyrannical goals without invoking, corrupting, and utilizing the medical profession, whether it's the psychiatric profession, as in Stalin's Russia and the United States, or whether it's the medical profession, as in the Holocaust in Germany, Poland, etc. No modern, or China, no modern tyranny succeeds in their final goals without the corruption of the medical community. Would you agree with that, Catherine and
abs-
Ralph?
Absolutely.
absolutely.
No
And
question.
therefore, it is the responsibility of everyone who is even remotely connected to the medical world to take the Health Keeper's Oath at healthkeepersoath.org and say, I will not violate the rights of other human beings for political purposes, no matter what. And it's a very important site, healthkeepersoath.org. I'm sorry. The principle is that judges, attorneys, physicians, nurses, people who have the public trust and handle either the body politic or the body physical must be incorruptible, or we have no political safety.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that, to a very great extent, we have to recognize that wars have consequences. And one of the great consequences of World War II was the enshrining in international law of the idea, the concept of informed consent. One of the chief series of crimes against humanity that were charged against the Nazis were what were called the doctors' trials, part of the subsequent Nuremberg trials, in which the Nazi doctors were put on trial based on something called the Nuremberg Code. Dr. Rima, you're going to need to put yourself on mute, except when you're talking.
I will right now.
Yeah. Okay. Um, the doctors' trial put on trial, I think, 23 Nazi doctors who were engaged in all sorts of evil acts on behalf of the regime with their white coats and stethoscopes around their necks or whatever. And they were tried on the basis of something called the Nuremberg Code, which was a document created after the war. It was a restatement of the law of informed consent as it was considered to be in existence at the start of the war. Under the terms of the Geneva Convention, when a victorious power puts nationals or soldiers of the defeated power on trial and does so under a code of law, it must be a code of law that applies to the victor as well, clearly in the Geneva Conventions. So the United States, which authored the Nuremberg Code, is certainly bound by it. And what does the Nuremberg Code say? Absolute essential. It is absolutely essential that the human subject give informed consent to any medical intervention. That's also very clearly stated in the United Nations Bioethics Declaration, where almost the same language about fraud and force and coercion is used. Famous language you can see on our website in a number of places. And it's also part of the United States case law. As far back as 1913, a doctor in New York State, where Dr. Rima is licensed, was held to have committed trespass malpractice by engaging in a medical intervention without informed consent. As recently as 2014, Supreme Court said in an informed consent case having to do with taking blood for a drunken driving case, the court said, we have never wavered from our commitment to the idea that you have a privacy interest in preventing agents of the state from piercing the skin. In that case, Missouri versus McNeely, the Supreme Court noted McNeely did not consent. And without consent, they could not pierce his skin without a court order specifically naming him and giving him an opportunity to object and raise legal objections. Due process of law. Our skins are a barrier to the power of the state. Right, Catherine?
Well, that's how I understand it, but that's not how the courts that I'm looking at are interpreting it. Particularly if you're a psychiatric patient, then you're just in this never land of that your consent isn't important anymore, that you lack capacity,
That's right. All
and
right. That's where they try to play that one. And of course, the CDC in its new regulation literally says that it is to be without regard to the consent of the particular persons involved. So they want
well,
all of
it's a
us, we are
it's a
all
good gateway.
incompetent. We're all incompetent. They want to make us all into incompetent subjects as opposed to sovereign individuals.
Well, it's a good tip if you have to use an assault team to knock someone to the floor to inject them, that it's probably not with their consent, whether they are technically considered to have capacity or not. But that's what is done every day in every psych hospital, probably in America. And they have these various legal theories under which they do that. One theory is, oh, sure, you can do that without a court order as long as it's an emergency, and life and limb are at stake in some way.
Well, that's part of what was at stake in Missouri versus McNeely. And the court said he could have picked up a phone and gotten an order from a judge on the phone. And the cop did not do that, and therefore it was not lawful. So maybe, just maybe, things are tightening up, and we need to see some young attorneys pushing back. Dr. Rima, I remember you and our good friend Nancy Orlin Weber, RN, telling us some stories about a certain psychiatric hospital in New York State that you both worked in a few decades, or maybe many decades ago. A hospital that might have been the model for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You want to join in this discussion about?
Absolutely. And the folks who are having a very loud discussion in the corner over there have left. I'm in the critical care unit waiting room. That's where I'm broadcasting the show from. So people come and go in various states of distress and loudness. Um, Nancy Orlin Weber and I first met when she was a nurse and I was a resident in psychiatry. She was running the psychiatric ward in Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx. I would emphasize it was the old Lincoln Hospital, where a scene from The Godfather was being filmed when I staggered out from um, about 3 days without a break on duty into the driveway. There was a period car, and there was Marlon Brando, and I there was a film crew, and I thought, okay, Now I'm hallucinating. That's how tired I am. But actually, it really was happening. It was the old Lincoln Hospital. Anyway, it was a completely insane psychiatric ward. The patients were by far the more sane contingent. The staff was beyond
Mm.
Dr. Rima, we're losing
divided.
you. We're losing
Oh,
you.
can you hear me now?
You just,
Can you
yes,
hear me?
yes, you just
Okay.
said the staff was beyond, and we lost you at that moment.
The staff was beyond doubt the much crazier component of the population. The patients were somewhat crazy, but the staff was completely crazy, and there were multiple layers and reasons for that craziness. But that was my second um, experience with organized psychiatry. My first was as a medical student, and I noted that what was insane was given a name and a number if a patient was associated with it, and was given a buy, given a pass if a doctor, staff, or administrator was associated with it. Insanity was not fairly recognized. It was unfairly recognized based on your political status. If you were a patient slash prisoner, then you could be identified as crazy. If you had keys to the ward, then you were by definition sane, no matter how crazy you actually were.
Yeah, yeah, certainly seems to be what I'm observing in the John Rohr matter. Um,
Well, can you tell us about that? Because we
yeah.
certainly are on the same page, but you are very much in the middle of a book with many pages that are very important for all of us to know about. Tell us about the case that you're most involved in.
Okay, well, in the John Rohr matter, this was a young person who got on street drugs for a while. He was a very bright guy, but got into a little bit of trouble with the law because he walked into the house of a friend. He thought it was a friend, got arrested. It was the wrong house. He was under the influence of a street drug. From that point on, this was like 10 years ago. From that point on, then he became a part of the mental illness system and was coercively, if not forcibly, drugged at one point with Celexa, an SSRI drug, Buspar and Vega, and Neurontin all at the same time.
Ooh,
Uh,
ooh, ooh.
yeah, yeah, and of course a terrible diet, and was placed in a group home with other violent people also taking similar drugs. There were assaults going on every single day. It was a full time job just to dodge the assaults. At one point, he was just not able to do that, and he struck another individual who had been groping him, and then he got the label of being violent. So then he has been locked up ever since that time. Now that's a fairly typical scenario.
Locked up in a psychiatric facility
Yes,
or a
yes,
criminal institution.
psychiatric facility because he made the mistake of pleading not guilty by reason of insanity rather than what would have been a more accurate and legally available defense, which would have been involuntary intoxication from the drug. And a lot of attorneys miss this defense, which is an absolute defense. It's different than voluntary intoxication. Involuntary intoxication is where a patient takes a prescribed medication as prescribed, but isn't being given informed consent, isn't being given the true facts of what this drug may do. By the way, this drug may turn you into a very aggressive individual. It may cause this, may cause that. He was not told those things. He began to suspect that, but was told basically, shut up and sit down and keep taking your drug. So he did, and this is what happened. So he got into the system and he started finding out about these drugs, and he started speaking out about the drugs and that he did not want to be, he wanted to taper off of them. And they told him, you are not going to taper off of anything, and we will assault you and we will knock you down and we will make you take these drugs. Um, so this case became highly litigated. We've been litigating it ever since 2013. In 2014, we were successful in stopping the forced drugging, which he was subjected to for 3 years and 7 months with Risperdal Consta. I know a lot of people may not be aware. In 2011, a Harvard study was done in which it was completely validated that SSRI drugs and many psychotropic drugs and non-psychotropic drugs do lead to violence, are associated uh, uh, dramatically with incidents of homicidal violence. I don't think the study even counted the suicidal violence that was involved. All those studies were then cited to the court repeatedly. Um, we have 2 experts. We've had 3 mental health experts on John's side who have testified at various times that he did not need to be on the drugs, and he needs to be, in fact, released. Like I say, it's been 7 years. He was never represented in the original proceeding, other than by a public defender who basically took the side of the state's attorney and just agreed that, yeah, best thing I can do for my client is just let him be taken away to wherever. And that's what happened to John in 2010.
You
There was
know,
no notice, no opportunity to be heard, no explanation what this hearing is about, no explanation that when you plead not guilty by reason of insanity and you get a psychiatric sentence, it's a death sentence. That's what it is. It's a death sentence. They don't tell you that, but it's a death sentence. Sure, they have 6-month review hearings, and the state does have the burden of proof that to prove, yes, you're mentally ill according to the legal definition and a danger to self or others. They've never been able to sustain that, but the courts just keep him locked up anyway. Right now, we're just struggling to get another hearing since we're entitled to one every 6 months. We've been asking for one since March of 2015. We've been given many excuses why he can't have one, or they schedule one and then it gets continued by the request of the state's attorney for frivolous reasons. It just goes on and on and on. We've got another date of November 4th now. Um, but yeah, it's, I think a lot of people are under the false impression in the public that when you plead not guilty by reason of insanity, that that's some sort of a kinder, gentler cop out to what would otherwise happen. And I think most people who've actually experienced the NGRI plea will tell you it would have been much better to have been in the penitentiary.
uh-huh,
Um,
uh-huh.
with
I think
everything that, yeah,
people don't understand what the reality of psychiatric hospitalization is. It is not kinder, gentler. And I want to emphasize a couple of words that you said in passing, and that is you were talking about what can happen to you, your personality, your perception, and your behavior. People can become violent and homicidal and disoriented and so on. You said psychiatric and non psychiatric drugs. Most people who are listening to this show are aware to greater or lesser degree of the potential to elicit violence either toward the self or toward others, homicidal and suicidal thoughts and actions that psychiatric drugs have. But they may not realize that other drugs, non psychiatric drugs, also have those potentials. And the public is totally misled by the pretty ads and um, the rapid list of symptoms. Ask your doctor. But the same potential exists in many drugs.
Yes, the top of the list with Dr. Glenn Mullen, who did the Harvard study, was Chantix, which is an
The
anti-smoking.
anti-smoking, right?
Yeah,
Which, by the way, is the most widely prescribed drug for anti-smoking in the United States. So
that's
the
horrifying.
propaganda to the doctors has been very successful. Now,
Oh,
if
certainly.
doctors knew and cared about the homicidal, suicidal potential, and it's not just acting on these thoughts that counts, it's having the thoughts induced as well. That's quite a misery. If they knew about that, would they prescribe something else, or would they prescribe hypnosis, or would they prescribe neurobiofeedback? Um, Probably not, because that takes time to explain, and writing out a prescription that takes 36 seconds is much more beneficial to them, because then they meet their patient productivity goals that are imposed upon them by the hospital or the practice.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, it's quite there may be other reasons, financial reasons in the case of hospitals. We've certainly seen in Ohio that when we expanded Medicaid, that there's been a consequent buildup of Ohio's, what I call the Ohio's mental illness system. Another hospital going up in Cleveland, I understand, and the relative number of people locked up at any given time is small, as far as being locked up in a state hospital. But when you have AOT, which is euphemistically called assisted outpatient treatment, really means forced outpatient treatment, you can control a large number of people, much larger than the 1,000 or so who are currently locked up in hospitals, by keeping them locked up basically in their communities with forced drugging orders, which means that you can, if you're under a county assisted outpatient treatment plan, a team can go to your home and check your blood, make sure you're taking those drugs. And if you're not, they can do the same thing to you in your own home that they could do to you in the hospital. If you don't like it, maybe you should be hospitalized.
Well,
So
it's
there's
actually, it leads us into that whole issue of in-home hospice and the Liverpool pathway and essentially euthanasia.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what they're I had a guest on a broadcast who told Pat Risser, who explained that the move is to get psychiatric patients to understand that they have an incurable disease, and that wouldn't life is really kind of pointless, isn't it? Wouldn't it be better to just end it now? Wouldn't it be better for your loved ones? And then we're already moving in that direction for other non-terminal conditions to be euthanized, or outpatient or assisted suicide, whatever you call it. That the next target population for assisted suicide is psychiatric patients.
Who are, of course, taking drugs that increase suicidal thoughts, and who are, um, by definition, mostly pretty unhappy people. So rather than helping them toward a state of tranquility and equilibration and productivity, isn't it better to include them on the depopulation side of the ledger and just get rid of them? There are now clinics in the Netherlands for ending your own life voluntarily for whatever reason or no reason. A celebrated case recently was given permission to end her life with a physician's assistant because she was tired of living. She was a young woman. She was not ill. She was just tired of living. And so she was assisted to not live. And that's legal.
Well,
Yeah.
in many human societies, the right to commit suicide was a precious and important right. Think of the number of people in the Roman Empire who chose to kill themselves rather than, submit to living under outrageous conditions.
Well, that's one thing if you make the decision to kill yourself, but it's another thing to involve someone else in it. That should not be legalized, in my opinion.
Well,
And
but I also don't think it should be criminalized. If a loving spouse or family member or close person decides to assist someone who is suffering to stop suffering, um,
mm-hmm,
I don't see that as a crime. On the other hand, I see socially engineered depopulation serving suicide or homicide as just another piece of something fundamentally correct being used for fundamentally incorrect purposes.
yes, yes. I wanted to bring up the corruption angle as far as getting more people subjected to psychiatry, at least in Ohio, and I suspect is happening in other states. Um, they have every state has an MFCU unit, Medicaid fraud control units, which are supposed to be they're federally funded and they're supposed to make sure that there's not abuse going on in state facilities, however, or any facilities. Uh, I know of no state facility that ever gets uh, investigated by the state attorney general, who is the body that is supposed to investigate these state hospitals, probably because it's the attorney general who represents the hospitals when the hospitals commit crimes or their employees do. And that happened there. That happens, for example, at John Rohr's hospital. That hospital has a history of 2 rapes of patients, subject to a couple of lawsuits. But what I found is that there's with Medicaid expansion, there's the way it happened in Ohio was that it provided well, there's more and more concern that more people who don't need services will be caught up into involuntary commitments as we look at what the Ohio Supreme Court has just been doing. It has engaged in a long-term alliance with not only the mental illness system, OMAS, but also with a Dr. Cardwell Nuckols, who is a convicted Medicaid, Medicare kickback perpetrator. U.S. versus Nuckols got a federal case number out of the Northern District of Ohio in 2001. But he's the official basic spokesperson for the Ohio Supreme Court in instructing Ohio judges about, and this is a direct quote from a legal journal in Ohio, the new standard for diagnosing individuals with psychiatric disorders. So Dr. Knuckles is either now or has been training the judges in Ohio's probate and common pleas courts in how to now diagnose people for psychiatric lockup or other control by courts. He has served as the Supreme Court of Ohio's keynote speaker since at least 2008. So anyway, so I brought that attention to the attention of a member of the staff of the Inspector General of the United States, Inspector General of HHS, Donald White, but in February of this year, but I have not heard anything back from him. But the Ohio legislature had actually voted to refuse the federal billions that were being offered to expand these services. But Governor Kasich made sure that their will, the will of the legislators, the voice of the people, would not be heard, and created his own little board that overrode the legislature. So we're seeing,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. That's absolutely breathtakingly hideous.
Yes, I'll,
Breathtakingly
yeah.
hideous.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so, this new standard, what does it say? This has a very Stalin-esque ring, especially when you consider the fact that a few months ago, the FDA opined that people with oppositional defiant disorder, which I suspect would include Ralph and you and me,
Hmm.
people with oppositional defiant disorder were automatically cleared for electroconvulsive therapy without a second opinion.
Oh, really?
And
I
that
remember
the
when
light,
ECT used to be just for depression, and now it's just for almost everything.
now it's for almost everything, including thinking differently.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
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 So that's sort of interesting. And you tell us about this new standard in Ohio,
We're not
which,
exactly sure what it is, other than what we've already seen reflected in the John Rohr case, which is um, part of the legal definition of mental illness that's bad enough that you have to be under a court order. The big part of that is that that your behavior is an imminent physical risk to yourself or others. Well, the only testimony there's ever been was, we don't like his opinions. We don't like it that he talks badly about the psych drugs to other patients. We want the other patients to like the drugs, and we want them to like their psychiatrist, and he's causing them to feel mistrustful. So he's a danger to them. That's how he's a danger. So he's now shut up about it. And he,
wow.
yeah,
Now,
they're just out front with it. They took him off the internet. He's a composer, and he's a writer, and he maintains websites. And he was able to do that from within the institution. He's been writing books and so forth. But they don't want him to do that because some people on the outside became incensed that he was being locked up, and they started calling the facility, and their sensitive ears just couldn't handle it. So that made him also a danger, and that's why he has to be kept off the internet. So his only source of news now is the Columbus Dispatch and CNN. They do let him listen to that and read the
s-
newspaper.
so they've given him a newsectomy.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
right.
Now, that's a very good point, Dr. Rima, to tell the good folks that we've reached just about the halfway point in this very interesting Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Folks, you can go to www.drrima Dr. Rima, truthreports.com, and there you'll find our blog. You'll find a lot of good stuff, and you'll find the way to make sure you're on the email list. Dr. Rima, do you have any special messages for the folks about where they can go to get further information about some of the things you've been talking
yes.
about?
There's a very, very useful and important news aggregation site called Open Source Truth. That's opensourcetruth.com. And Open Source Truth will handle any kind of information that needs to be out there, whether it's popular or not. It has not had a newsectomy, and by going to opensourcetruth.com, you will keep your newsectomy from being implemented. Once we have newsectomies, whether we're institutionalized patients or whether we're enslaved individuals who are given the rhetoric and rubric of being free, once we have newsectomies, as Thomas Jefferson knew, then we cannot have a democracy or a functioning republic. So having divergent, diverse, and dissenting information is essential to having intellectual and political freedom. As you can see, when the state begins to take away, or not begins, when the state continues the process of taking away information, as by the way, Google, a non state agent, does with Knowledge Vault, which censors the information that it reports to you on a search based on what its algorithm, or the NSA, thinks you should know about. Okay, which is why I recommend never using Google as a search engine, even though it's become a verb in our language to Google something. I recommend using DuckDuckGo.com as your search engine, because having done um, some comparative searching, and I wrote an article about this that you can find on our site, I realized that many sites, including Yahoo, are just mirrors of Google, and Google restricts your information flow by Knowledge Vault. They keep knowledge that you shouldn't have locked away from you. That's why they call it Knowledge Vault. And so you must fight hard for your intellectual freedom, as well as your health freedom, as well as your personal freedom. Tell us more. Our guest is Katherine Hines, an inactive attorney. It sounds to me like you're very active, but you're not using your license to be active.
Right, right. Yeah, I assist in some of the legal writing and research that John's two other attorneys are involved in, and I see that the hope that many of us have is if we can restore the role of citizens in the judicial process, but slowly we're not so slowly. We're seeing that eroding the right to jury trial, for example, used to be a feature of mental health commitments. And it was a feature that was known back in the 1800s, actually. Um, and most state constitutions assure the right of jury trial, as Ohio's does, that the right shall be inviolate, is the word, even in civil cases as well as criminal court, of course. Um, and yet we're demanding jury trials, and we did demand a jury trial repeatedly in the John Rohr case, and we're told, oh no, the statutes don't talk about a jury trial. Wait a minute, I thought the Constitution trumps a statute. If the Constitution says your right is inviolate, you can't limit that right. The legislature can't limit it by
Right.
statute.
You are absolutely correct.
But that's what they're
And,
doing.
oh,
That's what they're doing.
Well,
They're
you know,
suppressing. Yes, that's right. The other way, one of the other ways that citizens can participate, which has happened, we were able to do in the John Rohr case, is he's got a lot of supporters now, and they're attending the hearings, and that does tend to make the judiciary act a little bit better. I've always found that in my practice, that when you have spectators in the courtroom, there are things that will not be done from the bench. Um,
can you expand on that a little bit?
one of the problems that we're starting to see, and we have seen in the John Rohr case, is that we can't really count on the integrity of the trial record. And this is, a very fundamental part of due process, as I'm sure Ralph is quite aware. If you can't have a verbatim transcript, you're able to pay for a transcript, and you demand a transcript, and it's a public hearing. We're finding that we are not getting that. Now, if we have spectators in the courtroom, as we did in the John Rohr case, we were able to say, look, we ordered up a transcript, and then we've got all these inaudible places, or so, in some instances, we wouldn't even get the transcript. We pay for it and then not even get the transcript. The court reporter would be dodging phone calls about, where's the transcript? Um, so we would have to bring back, so we brought back the witness, who said, basically, I did not say this, I did say that. Witnesses in the courtroom said, I remember hearing him testify this and this and this, and not this and this and this, which is in the entry, that's one way in which having a spectator in the courtroom can help keep things a little bit honest. But the reality is, when you go into the courtroom anymore, of course, you're searched just as a spectator, just as a citizen. You're searched. You go through a metal detector, and there are apparently, I haven't investigated this thoroughly, but it is highly widely believed that you can't use your cell phone to record. You can't go into the courtroom and do any recording. We actually have a documentary film company that has requested permission to film in the next hearing in John's case. That's being ignored. But I don't think that we have we've gotten better versions of what happened than we could have had, but we've demanded an audio. There's a tape playing at the same time as the court reporter is taking down the testimony, or the court reporter takes down the testimony later from the tape recording. We want a copy of the tape recording of the audio. It's an audio file. It should be emailable. Those motions have been systematically ignored. We've been demanding that since like 2014. Even though the Ohio Supreme Court has a rule that these are public record. The audio file, it's a public record. We'd like to look at the audio file, see if it matches the transcript. That's all we're looking to do. We brought a court reporter of our own down. That court reporter was prohibited from entering the courtroom. It just goes on. So having spectators in the courtroom puts a little bit of a damper on that kind of conduct. The other way that the public can participate and is participating in the John Rohr case is through some states have some kind of version of this. From the common law, there used to be a power in the citizens to bring affidavits and even criminal complaints themselves, but there's a vestige of that in the Ohio Revised Code that allows citizens to sign affidavits, as they did in the Tamir Rice shooting case, saying, look, this is what we know. Here are documents to support what we know. We believe that there is probable cause to issue an arrest warrant, a criminal complaint against person X. Oftentimes, person X is a government employee, and of course, we know that government employees are governed by different rules of justice than the rest of us. So, for example, in John Rohr's case, the prosecuting attorney himself, the state's attorney, engaged in an act of perjury, suborning perjury of one of his witnesses. And so obviously we're not going to go to Jeff Marks's boss and ask him to prosecute his second in command. That isn't going to happen. So what did happen is citizens, about 8 of them, signed affidavits and had exhibits saying, referring to the transcript, this question was asked, this answer was given, but look at this exhibit, that directly contradicts it. This is perjury, we think. And you can take your affidavits to a reviewing official, which can be a judge, it can be other people. We chose a judge in a different county and asked him to make a probable cause determination, just like Tamir Rice's family did in Cleveland. But the court in the county that we picked decided that they didn't want that judge to make the probable cause finding, and they decided they were going to convert the citizen affidavit procedure, because they weren't familiar with it, into a civil suit. It wasn't a civil suit. It was a Section 2935.09 proceeding. It's a special proceeding. But they have their little e-filing system now, where if you don't fit your little case in one of their categories, then you don't. They'll fit it into one of their categories for you, and that's what they did. So they turned it from being the pre-criminal proceeding into a civil proceeding, and then they later used that civil proceeding to say as it was later used as an excuse for continuing one of the John Rohr cases in Ross County in the county. It just goes on and on. But perjury has a long statute of limitations, so citizens can pick another county if they want to and do it again. And it looks like the perjury is going to keep coming, so there won't be any lack of opportunities there. But I think that
Why? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just think it's really important for citizens to not look at jury duty as a burden or any way that they can participate in the court system, because it's the only thing that stands between the tyranny in the courtroom and 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 not having it.
Do you believe that judges are routinely suborned, or do you believe that they're miseducated, or do you believe that they're idiots?
Oh, I don't think that they're idiots. I definitely don't think that they're idiots. But I do know that there's growing evidence that they have become full of themselves. I mean, all you have to do is go online and you see these horrific videos of judges treating litigants with the most disrespect that imaginable, and illegally so in many instances. Just venting their spleen against people. The judge in Michigan that screamed at these children, good children, not delinquent children, because they didn't want to have lunch with their abusive father, and she told them, "I'm going to put you in a juvenile facility," and she did. She was later
Oh,
disciplined for it,
wait,
but
wait, 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 wait. You said they're not idiots. At least in that example, I would have to disagree.
well, I think there's a difference between being an idiot and being gratuitously cruel. I don't.
Ah,
Perhaps they coexist. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
horrendous. I agree with you. Horrendous. Um,
But they know that they're
but
going to
in
be
order,
backed up 99% of the time by appeal courts.
ah, ah,
So so that's why they feel like there are no limits. There's all this talk about absolute judicial immunity. I don't believe judicial immunity is absolute. I don't believe that immunity for judges covers crimes that are committed. And that's what we alleged in another civil suit involving the crimes that were participated in by two of John's judges. I believe it was a crime when they were warned that John was suffering symptoms of tardive dyskinesia and they needed to stop the forced drugging, that they could kill him if they did not stop it. They ignored that. Justices from the Ohio Supreme Court were specifically presented with these documents, a signed statement from John's family doctor pleading with them to stop the drugging. They ignored it, and so did the trial judge. I don't think that that's not incompetence. It's something. It's being bribable. It's being influenced by money. There's a lot of money in big pharma and keeping the Medicaid billings going, and you start getting judicial precedents that interfere with that, and you're gonna interfere with that income stream. Nobody's gonna mess with that. The Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Maureen O'Connor, has been skewered by the New York Times because of all the massive campaign contributions she has received from big pharma, big medical. Um, and she claims, well, okay, but that doesn't mean that influences my decisions just because I'm getting millions and millions of dollars from these sources. It
no,
sure looks
people
like
people
it if you
remain
look at her decisions.
interesting. Um, so other than showing up at the courtroom and bringing um, petitions of the kind you've talked about, what else can people do to prevent themselves and others from being eaten by a system of injustice?
Well, of course, they need to become knowledgeable, like by listening to broadcasts such as yours and others. Dr. Bregan has written a remarkable article you're probably aware of about psychiatry's role in the Holocaust. Um, I think that people tend to not tend to underestimate psychiatry's power to do that. But I think that that role in tyranny has been indispensable historically, just as it is now. So they can educate themselves. They can engage in. I don't know that it's as effective as it used to be, but well, in the John Rohr case, people have taken to the streets and they have um, um, held up. We've been having vigils for liberty, not only for him but for others who are victims of mass incarceration. We had speakers, and we're in the process of putting up YouTube videos on that. We did the last protest in front of the courthouse. Um, I don't know. It's better than doing nothing. It seems to be striking a few nerves. A few employees came out and took photographs. We were afraid that there might be law enforcement involvement, and they watched, but they didn't do anything. We had one of John's attorneys there just to be sure, who's kind of an expert at at being at protests and making sure that they go smoothly. But it's more difficult than it used to be. This isn't the 1960s anymore. For example, it used to be that people could attend court proceedings and find out, watch their government at work, find out what is going on um, in trials, what the rules of evidence are. But anymore, it takes this is not for the faint of heart. You go in the courtroom now, and after you've gone through the metal detector and you've been searched, you go in the courtroom and the judge will snarl at you, "Who are you? What is your name? What is your address? Why are you here?" And then you can sit down and listen. It's an intimidating atmosphere that
Is
didn't used to
that
be.
in any way illegal, or is it
No.
within the right of the judge to ask who's in my courtroom?
I think that what judges do varies, and they are given a lot of leeway, and some are more tyrannical than others. I've had the privilege of appearing before some eminently fair judges, and I've also appeared before some judges who were time servers, and some judges who were trying to manipulate the outcome. We've seen it all. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It takes all kinds, and there are a lot of judges, but it does seem that that the trend is particularly what we have now is self-policing, and just as we do in police departments. If you make a complaint against a judge in any state, it's secret until the bar association, the organized bar, decides that your grievance is going to be public. And during that time, it can't be publicized. I have drafted some judicial accountability legislation that I believe that ought to be circulated as uh, through the states as a constitutional amendment to the state constitution that would eliminate the secrecy of complaints against judges. If judges, like anybody else, are not committing ethical violations and are accused falsely, they are quite capable of defending themselves against false allegations. But I believe it's a matter of the public's right to know if what the nature of those accusations are, what the nature of the defense is. But that doesn't happen anymore. You file a grievance against a judge and it goes down a black hole. You're to never speak of it. And in many instances that I'm personally aware of, you never hear again what happened to your grievance, not ever. It just went away. It's just gone. Um, so, yeah, as far as judicial accountability, uh, another, besides taking away the confidentiality, the secrecy that surrounds judicial complaints, I think it's important to take the deciding power away from the judge's colleagues and give it to a jury type of panel, maybe a jury. I think citizens ought to be involved in that process. After all, if you look at the Code of Judicial Conduct, it's not rocket science. I think anybody with a high school education should be able to sit down, be educated about what is and what is not a conflict of interest, what is an egregious violation of law and what isn't. I'm not saying that judges should be disciplined for simple errors of law, but when they're repeated errors of law, when they are consistently depriving litigants of constitutional rights, then I think the decision making should not be in the hands of their colleagues and friends. It should be in the hands of impartial jurors, impartial citizens. But that's not what happens today. This is not just my idea. This has been judicial accountability legislation in a similar form that addresses those two prongs: take away the secrecy and make judicial actions accountable to citizens. That's been talked about by Gary Zerman, an attorney in California, Zena Crenshaw in Indiana, and they both have enacted or have drafted similar legislation. It's difficult to get a statewide petition circulated uh, today.
Well, let me offer you a resource. The Natural
Okay.
Solutions Foundation obviously has a strong interest in judicial accountability, in many kinds of accountability and protection for the individual and for their freedoms. We have a system that we pay a lot of money for every month that allows people to click a button and send emails with their own comments or with the comments that are provided for them as a model to any number of targets. It can be the people in their state. It can be the people who serve them in the federal government. It can be their governor. It can be the head of the Justice Department or whomever, or all of those. And we would like to offer your movement the opportunity to create an action item that would demand judicial accountability and a higher level of justice to so that your circle of influence can use this action item, spread it widely, and the target would be as decided. As I said, it can be divided by state. If you live in Ohio and you click submit, then your targets would be the Ohio hierarchy of accountability. If you live in Utah, then your nothing from you would go to Ohio. It would go to the similar appropriate people in
Oh
Utah.
yeah.
And we would provide that. Ralph is one of the trustees. The other trustee, the third trustee, is lying in a medically induced coma at the moment, so he's not voting. But Ralph and I think, would concur immediately in offering this system to your circle of influence. You provide the word, you provide wording, you provide the target desired, and we will use our system to make this available. And you send the link out to your people they go there, they take the action, and it follows through on your program. Am I correct,
Oh,
Ralph, that
thank
this
you.
is something we'd like to make
Yes,
available?
indeed. Absolutely.
Oh, that
Absolutely.
sounds great.
It is very powerful. These are our action items. And then typically, we will create a tiny URL like, Ralph, what's the tiny URL for the CDC action saying to the CDC, don't you dare become the agent of medical tyranny? What is
I'm
the
looking that up right now.
Okay, we'll tell you what it is in a second. Um, we use this mechanism frequently, and we have pushed back the U.S. government, the Chilean government, and other fairly significant agencies from doing awful things like imposing mandatory vaccines in 2009, for example. It's a very
Okay.
powerful system,
That's
and we'd like
informed,
to offer it to you.
Dr.
Go
Rima,
ahead, Ralph.
that's informed consent protection. It's one of our tiny URLs, tinyurl.com/informed consent protection, all one run-on word.
That's a
I'm posting that on the stream.
good, good. You know, it's very interesting. I was asked to move from the waiting room where somebody wanted to turn on the TV to the family room, which is a small room with a table and about 8 or 9 chairs in it. And so I walked down the hall with the phone on mute to do so. And I was sitting here, you know, talking with you in the empty family room. And the room just went black because there are no windows. And I thought, gee, maybe the hospital had a blackout. No, just this room. Oh, well, the lights are back on. So that's interesting. Let us see if we can help illuminate the lights of justice and transparency for us all.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Rima. That would be awesome to have that power. Yeah, I participated in a minor version of a citizen initiative in a city, and we were assured right from the beginning that we would fail and we would not be successful. We were trying to get rid of the traffic cameras out of our town, the surveillance cameras, and that were depleting people of their hard-earned money. Uh, there were many abuses with it. It took a lot of effort, these efforts are getting more and more difficult all the time, and you have to be on the ground. Um, Circulating physical petitions that you're physically witnessing registered voters signing. So it's a lot of work, but I think as things get worse in the economy and in the state of the state, maybe people will be more willing to take to their neighborhoods and go circulate petitions.
Well,
It would be a valiant.
the cool thing about this system, um, Catherine, is that you can do that, but you can also use social media, email, and other electronic means to accomplish the same thing. And we have found that the manpower needed is far less and the impact is far greater.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. We with a constitutional amendment, I think there's no way to make it possible to do online, but you can get people who are willing to do the footwork online by soliciting them, people who are really willing to be committed to doing
Well,
it.
I think it's going to take massive effort on
Hmm.
many levels, and they all work together. One of the errors that I think our side makes is thinking that we have only one or two kinds of resources when we have many, many, many. The other side, of course, is funded with limitless resources, and they use everything uh, together. They bombard us with the information or misinformation that they want us to have or keep away from us. We have to get smarter. And this electronic option can be very, very powerful for you. And if it generates people
Hmm.
coming out to meetings and commute and citizen participant trainings or that showings of films or whatever, that's fine. If it doesn't and it's all
Yeah,
done electronically, that's fine too. Or some intermediary combination that emerges based on the situations, the peculiar situations. Maybe you'll generate courtroom battalions of people who go to courtrooms to hear
right.
important hearings on designated days. It's so important to use the electronic means available to us, which was
Absolutely.
created to surveil us and weaken us. Why can't we use it to strengthen ourselves and free ourselves?
Absolutely. Yeah. I really appreciate that offer, Dr. Rima.
You
That would
know,
be awesome.
we found out over the years that it seemed to take more people acting in concert each time that we tilted at those windmills. Back in 2007, it was about a half a million emails to the FDA that stopped the famous or infamous CAM guidelines. Back in 2009, it took 3.5 million or thereabouts, Dr. Rima, emails to stop the
Exactly.
weaponized swine flu vaccine false flag panic. And then in
Mm-hmm.
11, the period of time with the FDA so-called food modernization regulations, about 5 million emails in order to preserve the exemption for the DSHEA products. But along the way, different countries, Dr. Rima stopped Monsanto, or at least La Ley Monsanto, the Monsanto law, from being imposed in Chile with probably a few 100,000 emails. Of course,
No,
smaller
three
company.
and a half million
Oh my
from a
gosh,
country of 17.5 million people.
that's sort of like getting 30 million or so Americans. You know,
Yes, that is
yep.
exactly right.
So that keeps on going up. It's very, very powerful. But now it seems to me that the first of those examples happened through email. The Chile example happened through social media, and that's the next big area where we have to mobilize people through the social media. And the issue is the CDC and its new regulation, which is horrendous. It actually explicitly states that our consent doesn't matter in their exercise of their so called authority, their illegitimate tyrannical authority. So we've filed an objection because the public comments are allowed. We've set up an action item, which Dr. Rima mentioned, informed consent protection action item, which will get messages through to the politicians about this issue. We are seeking a member of Congress to introduce a bill, the FIRM Act, Freedom of Informed Medical Refusal, right? The FIRM Act. Um, and that is intended to protect our informed consent rights by, and I think our guest will like this one, by creating a cause of action in federal court when people's informed consent rights are violated. So enforcing international law, as it were. So we think this is an important area. Uh,
Yes.
the president of our foundation, General Bert Stubblebine, literally in a critical bed in a hospital a few yards from Dr. Rima right now, told us a number of months ago. He said the right of informed consent is the defining issue of the 21st century. Everything we've been talking about in health freedom comes down to informed consent. This is the issue,
Yes.
and that's why we must stop the CDC. This is the line in the sand. This really is. And that's why it's got to become a viral. And we're getting ready to do press releases on it. We're going to do a video on it, and we're going to really push this because we believe that it's really important. And what do we say in our objection? Well, we talk about some of the stuff I spoke about earlier, the Nuremberg Code, the Missouri versus McNeely case. We talked about how the CDC and other government agents that would enforce this draconian law regulation themselves are responsible. And they can't just say, I was just following orders. when a crime against humanity is involved. There is no defense of I was just following orders. It was the law. It was the regulation. No, no, and there's no statute of limitations either. The Nazi doctors never expected to be held to account. The Soviet psychiatrists never expected to be held up to universal was it opprobrium? Is that the right word?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet it was so. And I think the government agents and the pharmaceutical agents involved in this entire vaccine gambit need to know that they may very well be held accountable
Well, it's
someday.
not just the vaccine gambit. I'm wondering whether, in the matter that we've been discussing, um, where the forced drugging and the incarceration has been going on, whether you have thought about the Inter American Human Rights Court, where individuals, not countries, have standing. In the World Court, of course, as you know, only
Mm-hmm.
nations have
Mm-hmm.
standing. But in the Human Rights Court, which I believe trumps and transcends national courts because of the international treaties involved, the individual has standing. And it may be that this is an international human rights case.
I think you may be right about that, Dr. Rima. I've done some preliminary
Yeah, it
research
may be.
on the Inter-American Court, and I'm going to be looking into that further and seeing if the United States is amenable to its jurisdiction. It could be very powerful, very powerful. We need to assert the right, or we lose it. That's what McNeely case said, and that's why we have the advanced vaccine directive cards available for people, advanced medical directives that say I refuse all vaccines. So you don't have to write it on the on the consent form, although you should, no matter what.
Well, I
We
certainly have the advance vaccine directive with me, signed by General Burt and signed by me. We have two of them in our wallet. But I have also been writing it on the consent form because that's a matter of the formal record. And I've been demanding, excuse me, copies of the consent. Interestingly, some departments are perfectly willing to give me consent copies, and some do not want the patient's family to have copies of the consent forms, which I find extraordinarily weird.
But you're not just the patient's family; you're also his medical surrogate.
right,
So
right.
that's the
Uh,
sort of thing that's going on.
no, I'm not. I have his power of attorney.
Right,
I am his decision maker.
right. So I
And
can't.
they do not want me, some of the departments do not want me to have copies of consent. I find that fascinating. Why not? I signed it. Am I not legally entitled to a copy of a document that I signed?
If the document itself does not say you may not have a copy of this, I can't see how they can object.
Oh,
What
there's
under
another.
what authority do they keep you from having? I
Well,
would.
it's not our
I-
policy to give copies. Really? Really?
Yeah, but I'm demanding one. So
Yeah, yeah. I find it
My
fascinating.
demand trumps your policy.
My
yeah,
demand trumps your policy. Yes.
if you don't have a law behind you, a statute, cite me a statute that gives you the right to do this to me.
Yes, I think that's, well, there's a very, very good patient advocate. And my next, um, my next gambit is to demand copies. I have half the copies approximately, and every one of those says I refuse all vaccines. But now it's very interesting because General Stubblebine needs nutrients, but we know that hospitals don't permit nutrients. However, the attending physician who is uh, basically keeping him from being dead, along with me keeping him from being dead, has said, yeah, if you want to give him the nutrients that you gave him at home, and these are quite advanced nutrients, since I'm a specialist in nutritional medicine, that's fine. I can do that. And then the hospital exploded in administrative territorial turf warfare because
Really?
pharmacy didn't know these products. No, they don't. And the nursing staff wasn't willing to have me administer it through the feeding tube and blah, 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 blah. So the patient advocate, who is a nurse and a very sensible lady, started at the top. She went to the head of the hospital and she said, "This is going to wind up on your desk anyway. Is this okay with you?" And he said, "Look, if I have a 2 milligram of sodium a day patient on the cardiac ward, and the family waltzes in with a Big Mac and fries, what are we going to do? Tackle them and drag them out in handcuffs? No, the patient can have whatever the family brings. So it's just like that." And then it took a
Mm-hmm.
full day of administrative tap dance and hoo ha to be able for me to be able to give the nurses 4 feedings per day that they will introduce into his feeding tube, whether they like it or not. But this is a huge, huge breakthrough in hospital policy. Remember at the beginning of the show, I said you have to be like
Mm-hmm.
a dragon guarding your treasure, who is your patient, and you have to be willing to make waves, and you have to be willing to have people say, "I don't agree with you. I think you're crazy." It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's the
You know,
same in the
folks,
judicial system.
right? Exactly. You know, folks,
We have been.
Dr. Rima has been keeping a great diary, if you will, of what's been going on in a series of blog entries. Actually, we've kept it all on one blog entry. So if you go to drrimatruthreports.com, and if you click on the blog vlog button and then scroll down a couple of blog entries, you'll see the General Burt medical bulletins. In fact, I'm going to put Dr. Ream, I'm going to put a link on the main page to those bulletins in a short while. I
Oh,
think that'll be
good.
a good idea to do.
What
But
were you going to say, Catherine?
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
John has been blessed with a family doctor who's very nutritionally oriented, and she's actually also a toxicologist, and she's been the one that has warned the hospital about their prescribing habits, and she actually signed the medical certification on our medical malpractice and legal malpractice civil suit against the hospital, many of its employees, and others. And she has actually been allowed now to send supplements to John
Ah,
at the hospital. It gets approved by a doctor of osteopathy there who is a little more, he's not a psychiatrist. He's the one that they have assigned to approving that. And he has been little by little not standing in our way. And so that's been as John has tapered himself off these drugs. He's had the nutritional support as well.
well, that's
So,
wonderful.
and they can't figure out, well, when are you going to decompensate? When are you going to decompensate? We're waiting, and he's not decompensating.
I have nourishment in my brain and my pancreas and my liver. So
Well,
I'm
isn't
not
that sort of one of the things you
decompensating.
specialized in, Dr. Rima, along the way, getting people
Absolutely.
off drugs and onto nutrients?
Absolutely. Um, Schizophrenics find that if they take high doses of vitamin B3, generally, they stop hallucinating. So they don't need the drugs that are given to them, presumably because they hallucinate. And vitamin B3 is a pretty inexpensive and pretty benign substance. It doesn't do the pharmaceutical industry and big medica and big insurance any good at all. Can't be patented. So this is a closely guarded and much poo-pooed secret, but it's the truth.
Right, right, yeah, yeah. We're nice in therapy. You mentioned the international angle. We actually did have Attorney Tina Minkowitz of the United Nations sign an affidavit detailing how the court and the hospital are violating the UN Torture Convention, which I guess the United States is not a signatory on, or is a signatory, but it hasn't been ratified. And
Right.
the United States has put in some 353 provisos, reservations, explanations, and other exceptions to it. But the definition of torture internationally isn't that much different than what has been enacted in the U.S. Code, and that was cited back in 2013 to the trial judge in John Rohr's case as to the definition of torture. And it clearly includes inflicting or threatening to inflict, administering mind altering substances or other procedures calculated to disrupt profoundly the senses or the personality. Well, in the case of psych drugs, isn't that the point of the drugs that they inject or otherwise administer? They
It
want to
is the
disrupt.
very point. It is the
Yeah.
very point.
I was electroshock therapy, so-called therapy, ever threatened as well?
Yeah, yeah. Apparently, however that works, it seems to be the same way that getting a blow to the head works. There's a temporary trauma-induced euphoria. Y- Is that right, Dr. Rima? That
Well, there
seems to be
can
the
be. There can be.
explanation.
Sometimes it's just disorientation.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, sometimes people lose their entire memory that they were ever married, had children, had grandchildren. It's just gone. They're a clean slate, and I guess that's the point. That's the
That's the
point.
point.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a lobotomy. It's an electrical lobotomy in the same way that the psychiatric drugs are chemical lobotomies. They're designed to separate one from oneself permanently.
Right. But in looking at that statute, I don't know. I don't know if you do, Ralph. Know of any prosecutions that have ever occurred under the federal torture statute. I am
I
told
do not.
I consulted, and I had on my broadcast a Dr. Jeanette Parker, who is some kind of a certified torture evaluator for the United Nations, and she indicates that to do her work, that she's not actually allowed to evaluate individuals who are U.S. citizens being tortured on U.S. soil. That's not part of what the UN lets her do. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Probably because the US has not ratified the Torture Convention, I would think.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, I suspect so.
How
And of course,
interesting.
the convention, the World Court and the other organizations don't. They have political influence to the degree the United States cares how it appears on the world stage, but they don't have actual enforcement powers. So that's a little worrying too.
By
You
the way, we
know,
have about 15 minutes left on this episode of the Dr. Rima Truth Reports.
Catherine, would you give your website? Because although Ralph has
yeah.
put it up, there will be people listening to this on archive and podcast format who won't see the live stream.
Sure. Yeah. For WLJA radio, that's With Liberty and Justice for All, is what it stands for. Just go to www.wljaradio.net, and you'll get our homepage, and then our broadcasts are on the left hand side, and you can get our archived interviews that way.
And
Yeah.
we'll send you the link to this one, which you can put up on your archive. Let me
Oh,
ask you
that'd
a
be great.
personal question.
Yeah.
Do you still believe in the justice system in the United States?
I believe in the Constitution, and I believe if we were following it, and it would work. It would work. But we're just not following it, and the all the remedies that are in place for not following it, all the consequences are also being ignored. That's why the only thing I can think of anymore is this judicial accountability legislation. But even then, why would anybody pay attention to it, even if it became a constitutional amendment? For example, we enacted an amendment to the Ohio Constitution in 2011 called the Health Freedom Amendment. I don't know if you're aware of that, but yeah,
No.
yes, it's called the Health Freedom Amendment. And we attempted to use it for the very first time in John's case, and we're told it didn't apply. Um, it was intended to be a response to Obamacare and to prevent people from having to pay for um, health insurance or any, but it was broad enough to include any health service against their will. There shall be no rule of court. There shall be no statute enacted. There shall be no anything that will compel anyone to participate in any health care service against their will. And against their will.
That is precisely informed consent, and
Yeah.
that's why we're seeking a federal law to protect that universal right.
Well, citizens took to the streets, and this was a difficult thing because it was statewide. They enacted it in 2011. All the newspapers in Ohio said, "Oh, it's a terrible thing. It'll free people from psych hospitals. It's terrible. All the crazy people will come out and they'll kill us all." But they enacted it. Something like 60% of the voters voted for it. Um, and yet we try to use it. It was used. It was threatened to be used once by an organization in Ohio because there was an Amish girl who had cancer, 12-year-old girl, and she did not do well with um, chemotherapy. I don't think they even, I'm not sure if they tried it a little bit or just didn't want to try it at all. But they decided against it and they decided to go to an alternative therapy. And they immediately were met with a guardian of some kind for their child. They were threatened with the child would be removed from their care. Apparently, they had time enough to leave the country with their daughter and they left with her. They got the alternative care. Meanwhile, the lawyers were battling it out in Ohio against the guardian. Um, and she was healing all this time and was able to come back fully healed when it was safe politically and legally for her to do so. And the group in Ohio threatened the guardian with Ohio's Health Freedom Amendment that prevented the actions that were being taken to coerce the family into agreeing to chemotherapy. And lo and behold, the guardian withdrew, and the case went away. And of course, the young woman that was supposed to be dead if she didn't submit to this chemotherapy came back glowing with health. So
Wonderful. Yes, we
yeah.
followed that story and we wrote about it. Were you directly involved in it?
I was not. I was not. There's an Ohio Constitutional Rights organization in Columbus that was involved in that. But
I just
we
posted a link to a recent article about an expert analysis of the effect of the Supreme Court decision on the Ohio Health Freedom Amendment. And I'm certainly going to take a much closer look at it and find out. Apparently, there are a couple of other states that have similar amendments. And those states might be the ideal places to go and seek congressional support for a national protection for informed consent.
well,
Dr.
see,
Rima, we have 10 minutes.
the only legal decisions that have involved that have not been favorable because it's only been our case. And when we appealed our case to the Fourth District Court of Appeals and then on to the Ohio Supreme Court, the only published decision says, "Oh, it doesn't apply." And so that's what we get. So I don't know if someone tried to use that. It could have been maybe the phrasing was less than ideal on it, but yeah, we've not been successful with it. So I don't know. maybe someone else will want to write it more explicitly to provide informed consent rather than for it to just be informed consent as to who's going to carry your health insurance.
Mm, right.
Uh,
But it was interesting that you got people out across the state in the street.
yes, they did. It took them 8 years. It took them 8 years, but they got it on the ballot, and
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So
Well, we have the internet, and as long as we have the internet, we have numbers. As long as we have numbers, we have hope for change, I believe, because what we've seen again and again, both in the United States and outside of it, is that one person, three persons, 11 persons asserting their right means nothing. However,
mm,
1 million persons, 3 million persons asserting their rights in a format that communicates the three most important words that an activist can say: don't you dare, does
mhm.
work, because call them what you will, the globalists, the controllers, the oppressors, the whatever you like to call them. We think globalists is a very good term. The depopulationists, um, they are weaker than they want us to think they are. They, in
That's right.
fact, are very weak. And when we combine together and we are many and we speak with the same voice, they step back every single time. And that is the dirty little secret that they do not want us to know, that they're few in number and they're actually weak. They're perceived as being all powerful, but like the man behind the curtain in Oz, they're not.
Mm. Oh, that's absolutely true. Yeah, we're seeing some chinks in the armor in the court system. A couple of note: the decision of U.S. Versus King Vassal, and that is a Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals decision that opened the door to uh, prescribers being liable for the damage that the prescribed drug that they're prescribing does to a patient uh, under the False Claim Act. So it seemed like there was and is an unholy alliance between big pharma and the prescriber that will let you off the hook. We will pay, because big pharma has been sued till the cows come home, and they pay their, as a cost of doing business, they pay their multi-million dollar fines, and sometimes they're multi-billion dollar fines, cost of doing business. But they keep their prescribers off the hook. The prescribers can do the off-label prescribing and get away with anything. But this decision casts some doubt on whether these prescribers are quite as safe as they might think that they are. The other decision I wanted to mention is in the Utah Supreme Court. I know it's only Utah, but it's a Supreme Court decision, and that is the decision of, it's called Jeffs, Jeffs versus West. And that case also decided where a prescriber prescribes a drug and that drug causes violence to another person, that other person can not just sue the manufacturer of that drug successfully, but can sue the prescriber.
Wow.
Yeah, that was 2012, Utah Supreme Court. But it cites just the old law, restatement of torts, and so it's not a area of Utah law by any means. It's fundamental principles, and it also gets prescribers off the hook that for things they should be off the hook from. In other words, if I don't do this or I don't do that, and my patient goes out and they kill somebody, am I liable? The Utah Supreme Court says, stop worrying about that. You can't predict those things. But what you can predict is is what, because if you don't do something and something bad happens, then that's you're omitting to act. But if you do something affirmative by actively prescribing a drug that actively does damage, and then it does damage to a third party, that you will be liable for. So
Uh-huh.
that's good.
How about damage to the person that you prescribed it to?
I think that's what
Nah,
the
nope.
King Basil case opens up the door to.
Well, of course, the pharmaceutical industry has been pushing the concept in some of the cases that any drug that's been approved by the government basically should be treated the same way vaccines are. No right to sue, especially no right to sue in state court.
Yes, I know they're working toward that. They're always working toward the next step. Yeah, yeah. As much as we're pushing, they're pushing too. Yeah. So yeah.
Making our numbers. There are two kinds of numbers here. There are dollars, and the other side wins on that one. And then there
Hmm.
are people, and we
Yeah.
win on that one.
But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that we don't need the dollars as well, folks, because
Oh,
without
no,
your
that's
support,
true, true.
last 3 minutes of the program, uh, Counsel, what is your takeaway message to the folks other than they ought to take a look at WLJAradio.net, which I'm certainly going to do? What would you like them to remember?
Uh, yeah, I think just educate yourself. Educate your family members, anybody you have any influence over. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Think about what is the financial incentive for whatever this corporate employee or this government official is telling me. Is this, are they really telling me this because they care about me, or do they have a financial axe to grind? And
And that financial acts can be fealty to the system to keep their job, to keep their
mhm,
place, etc. It doesn't have to be actual graft payment. It can be
that's true. That's true. And I recognize that for everyone who's listening to this broadcast, we all have our Achilles heels, our weak spots where, uh, of course, someone out there who's working in a psych hospital, for example, who's part of this insanity and this cruelty. Of course, I recognize if all you have is a GED and you live in Southern Ohio, that $14 an hour job sure looks good, and all those health benefits, the health insurance benefits you get from it. But and so nobody's asking you to give up your job, but at the same time, think about what you're doing. Think about, if you're a nurse, for example, or any other healthcare professional, the oath that you took. And maybe there are things that you can do without being openly defiant. Maybe
and
there,
and
yeah.
go to healthkeepersoath.org and refresh your memory about what your responsibility is legally, remembering that there is no statute of limitations on crimes against humanity.
Yeah, yeah. Folks need to think about that. Yeah, I heard a report about from a psych hospital that a team was taking to the ground a very, very visibly pregnant woman to force inject her, and um, and then one of the individuals was heard to say, "Oh, you guys, what we just did was so illegal." Even that, anything. Let's start thinking about, what we're doing, what the consequences are, what the morality is of what we're doing, and do something besides follow orders that are immoral, illegal, and inhumane.
I
Exactly.
have to say, General Burt, in his sedated state, extubated himself. He pulled the tube out of his throat,
Uh,
and he couldn't breathe, and it was a whole big emergency. And so, following that, his hands have been very gently and very tenderly restrained. But even that is very unpleasant. And the nurses and the doctors have been so correct in the way that they have reviewed the need for restraint orders. They have documented them. They have made sure that the right person was giving that order, that they checked with me. Did I approve restraining his hands? And unfortunately, when he was sedated and therefore not of clear mental status, yes, I did approve it. And I stood by his
Hmm.
bedside and I explained it to him and I soothed him and so on. But the opposite usually happens in institutions and in schools and in hospitals and nursing homes and so on. And it is a form of hideous, hideous torture for most people who are restrained. And the staff doesn't feel responsible to be hit with oversight. And they have to be. If you have someone in that kind of situation, you go there and you sit there and you make sure you understand why and what and wherefore, because your presence will alert the staff that whether they want to or not, they have got to pay attention to the rights of the patient and the rights of the decision maker for the patient if there is one. You cannot overestimate how important that is.
And that,
It's
folks,
tremendously important.
brings us to the end of this episode of Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Take a look at that website, healthkeepersoath.org.
And please donate. Please donate. We want to keep the foundation alive, just as we are keeping General Burt alive. And this has been a kick in the financial pants of this small and important health freedom organization. Ralph, would you give the donate link?
Absolutely, Dr. Rima. Just go to drrimatruthreports.com. There's a donate button right there. It'll take you to a page with clear instructions and a PayPal button that will allow you to donate easily. Thank you,
Thank you
folks.
so much.
Thank you.
Catherine,
Thank you, Catherine.
it's been a wonderful, wonderful discussion with you. I'm so pleased we've met. I want to thank
Thank you so
Janet
much.
Phelan for making the connection. And I would like you to make sure that you contact Ralph and me off air so that we can set up those action items. There can be an action item that empowers every state movement.
Right, we're connected on Skype, so
Absolutely.
let's make
Please.
it happen. All right, folks. Thank you all for listening in. We'll be back next week.